The first sign of something off wasn't a letter from the homeowners association. It came much earlier. It was the sudden flicker of the security light above my barn, glowing at 3:14 in the morning, unmoving, casting a steady beam into the quiet night. This wasn't a casual flash caused by an animal passing by. This was deliberate, like something or someone was waiting. I didn't panic. Instead, I sat in the dim corner of my living room, the glow of my monitors illuminating the space while a half-finished cup of coffee sat cold on the stove. Two figures moved along the far side of my property, trying to stay out of sight, but they were already caught in the beam of the camera. One walked with a limp, dragging the right leg slightly, while the other carried a flashlight, its red beam sweeping low in calculated patterns, a classic scouting move. They didn't try to break in, nor did they touch the gate. One of them paused at the well, tapping it twice before they disappeared back into the shadows. The next morning, I found something unusual, a dark, bone-carved pendant nailed to my barn door. It depicted a skull wrapped in twisted wire, with hash marks carved into its side. This wasn't just some prank. It was a clear marker, a warning. Later that afternoon, Lillian, the president of the Homeowners Association, showed up unannounced, walking up the private drive with her well-groomed dog in tow and an unnerving smile on her face. She claimed that the equipment I had on my property, specifically an old hay borer, was against HOA standards, even though it had been in place for years without issue. Her tone was sharp, hinting at possible consequences if I didn't comply with the community's aesthetic rules. The encounter was uncomfortable, and by the time she left, I had a violation notice waiting in my mailbox, signed by Lillian herself, who had somehow appointed herself as head of security enforcement, a role I was sure I never voted her into. That night, the security light flickered on again. This time, the power went out, cutting off the backup feed. I watched from the comfort of my living room as the same limping figure stood, staring directly into the camera lens before vanishing into the trees. The following morning, I found another sign. They will be buried where they fall, flipped over on the ground near the barn. A silent, cryptic message. I spent the entire day checking the security systems, replacing batteries and trail cams, resetting alarms, and tightening up the property for what I knew would only escalate. Days passed, and then I saw them. 6 black motorcycles, riding in formation, engines purring as they passed my gate, their riders scanning the property. They returned that evening, and one rider briefly turned into my gravel driveway before merging back into the pack. The next morning, things had gotten worse. My mailbox had been twisted at an odd angle, trail cameras had been tampered with, and, most disturbing of all, one of my goats was found dead. She lay beyond the east fence, neck broken, with a leather strap tied around her rear leg. The method was all too familiar, something I had witnessed during my time overseas. This was no simple act of vandalism. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, I dug through a box of old equipment and document from my past operations. I traced the bikers to a shady bar without an address and saw Lillian inside, deep in conversation with them about my land. Inside the barn, I found another ominous message. This time, a crow hung upside down with a spent shell casing beneath it and the words "Still watching, soldier," etched into the stall door. Lillian later called me, feigning concern, telling me that I wasn't a good fit for the neighborhood. As if to prove her point, I soon found surveillance footage of my property stored on a hard drive labeled Project Echo, Phase 2, a sign of something much bigger than a simple HOA dispute. Determined to uncover the truth, I hacked into the HOA's digital systems, finding a list of residents flagged as non-compliant, complete with personal notes and surveillance data. A kind of hit list masked as community enforcement. I set up traps and began tracking their movements, eventually confronting the HOA at a public meeting with evidence of their illegal activities, including Lillian's connections to the biker gang and unauthorized surveillance of residents. The room went silent as I laid out everything, and shortly after, my brother, the sheriff, arrived with deputies and a warrant. Lillian was arrested, and a federal investigation into the HOA's operations was launched. Despite Lillian's removal, the threats didn't stop. I discovered that the HOA was part of a covert operation, something much larger, known as Beta Site 3. Federal contractors and civilian operatives were masquerading as community enforcers, and I found that former associates, including a man named Reyes, were involved. It was a web of surveillance, control, and manipulation that stretched far beyond my neighborhood. Feeling the weight of the conspiracy, I fortified my property, ready for whatever came next. Lillian tried to intimidate me further, but I stood firm. Eventually, Reyes contacted me, admitting that the operation was going dark due to the heat it was drawing, but I knew better. It wasn't over. It was just changing shape. This whole ordeal opened my eyes to the terrifying lengths some groups will go to maintain control, hiding behind the mask of community management. It reminded me of the importance of being prepared, staying vigilant, and standing strong against those who will try to manipulate and intimidate you, especially when they operate far outside the lines of legality and morality. In the end, the entire ordeal wasn't just a battle for my property or even my safety. It was a battle for autonomy, for the ability to control one's life and not be manipulated by faceless powers hiding behind the veneer of community leadership. What had initially seemed like an isolated dispute with the Homeowners Association turned into a revelation of something far more sinister, something that was embedded in the very fabric of the system I had trusted. At first, I never could have imagined how deeply the roots of corruption could run. I thought I was simply dealing with an HOA president who overstepped her bounds, a small-town issue that could be quickly resolved. But as the incidents escalated, as the threats became more targeted and violent, I realized this wasn't just about an old hay borer or petty neighborhood politics. It was about control. It was about a group willing to manipulate and surveil residents, using underhanded tactics to impose their own version of order on the community. The real shock came when I uncovered the true nature of the operation. The HOA wasn't just about community aesthetics or enforcing rules. It was a smokescreen for something far more dangerous. As I dug deeper into the operation, I understood that these individuals weren't just concerned with monitoring a few rebellious homeowners. They were involved in a far-reaching system of control that extended well beyond the neighborhood. This wasn't just about keeping up appearances or maintaining order. This was about consolidating power through surveillance, coercion, and intimidation. The revelation that federal contractors were embedded in the HOA, disguised as enforcers, made me realize how easily a seemingly harmless community group could morph into a clandestine operation designed to monitor and control people on a much larger scale. I was no longer just fighting for my property or my privacy. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been manipulated by the idea of community rules or safety measures that, in reality, were tools of oppression. As I confronted the HOA, exposed their dirty secrets, and took a stand, I realized I wasn't just protecting my own patch of land. I was making a stand for anyone who has ever been pushed into submission by those in power. The entire process was exhausting, mentally and physically draining, but I knew it was necessary. The threats didn't stop after the arrest, and that was the scariest part. These covert operations don't end with one leader's removal. They evolve and become more hidden. The discovery of Beta Site 3 revealed just how organized these forces were. Still, I refused to let fear take over. I fortified my property, stayed vigilant, and prepared for what was to come, knowing this was only the beginning of uncovering how deep the control went. Looking back, I learned valuable lessons. The importance of standing up against intimidation, questioning control, and staying prepared no matter how small the threat seems. It was a wake-up call about the subtle dangers of unchecked power. The battle wasn't over, but I had exposed the truth and reclaimed my autonomy. In a world where power can easily slip unnoticed, it's vital to stay vigilant and never let fear silence you.